The black volcanic sand clung to everything: boots, rifles, and the sweat-soaked uniforms of the Marines crouched in their landing craft. As they approached the shores of Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, Private First Class Johnny Rodriguez pressed his back against the metal hull, feeling the vibrations of the diesel engines through his spine as he clutched his M1 Garand rifle. Around him, dozens of other young faces reflected the same mixture of determination and terror that had become familiar during their island-hopping campaign across the Pacific. "This is it, boys," shouted Sergeant William Bull Patterson over the roar of naval gunfire that had been pounding the 8-square-mile island for 72 consecutive days. "Intelligence says the Japs are dug in deep, but we've been softening them up real good." The confident words did little to mask the uncertainty in his voice. None of them knew that beneath the seemingly lifeless volcanic rock lay the most sophisticated network of tunnels, bunkers, and underground fortifications the Japanese had ever constructed. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, commander of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, studied the approaching shoreline through his binoculars from the command vessel. Mount Suribachi loomed ominously to his left, its 3-100-40-6- foot peak shrouded in smoke. From the preliminary bombardment, the mountain would become synonymous with American heroism. But on this morning, it represented nothing more than a strategic high ground that needed to be taken. Morrison had received his orders directly from Major General Harry Schmidt: secure the islands to airfields and establish a base for B-29 Superfortress bombers to refuel on their missions to mainland Japan. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, watched the approaching invasion fleet from his underground command post, buried deep within Mount Suribachi's volcanic rock. Unlike his predecessors who had met American forces at the beaches, Kuribayashi had spent 8 months preparing a defense that would bleed the Americans white. His 22,000 troops were dispersed throughout 11 miles of interconnected tunnels, with orders to make every yard of advance cost the Marines dearly. "We must make the Americans pay such a price," he had written to his wife weeks earlier, "that they will think twice before invading our sacred homeland." As the landing craft approached the designated beaches, codenamed Green, Red, Yellow, and Blue, the Marines could see the island's distinctive features taking shape. The sulfur deposits that gave Iwo Jima its name, meaning Sulphur Island, created an otherworldly landscape of black sand, steaming vents, and an acrid smell of volcanic gases. The beach appeared eerily quiet after the massive bombardment, leading some Marines to hope that resistance would be lighter than expected. Historical context reference from Flags of Our Fathers by James Bradley and Ron Powers, which extensively documented the Battle of Iwo Jima through first-hand accounts and military records. Corporal Michael O'Brien, a veteran of Guadalcanal and Saipan, felt a familiar knot in his stomach as his landing craft's ramp dropped with a metallic clang. The first wave of Marines splashed into the surf, expecting the murderous crossfire that had greeted them on previous beaches. Instead, they found its strange silence broken only by the sound of waves against volcanic rock and the distant rumble of naval guns still pounding the island's interior. "Something's not right," O'Brien muttered to his squad as they advanced across the loose, shifting sand that made every step a struggle. The beach gradient was steep, and the fine volcanic sand provided no solid footing. Equipment-laden Marines found themselves sliding backward with each step, their progress agonizingly slow. Behind them, more landing craft were arriving in waves, disgorging thousands of Marines onto the increasingly crowded beachhead. The apparent calm lasted exactly 14 minutes. At 10:00 a.m., Mount Suribachi erupted not with volcanic fury, but with the coordinated fire of hundreds of carefully positioned weapons. Machine guns, mortars, artillery pieces, and rifles opened up simultaneously from concealed positions that had survived the most intensive pre-invasion bombardment in Pacific War history. The Marines, caught in the open on the beach with nowhere to take cover, began falling in numbers that would haunt the course for generations. The volcanic sand of Iwo Jima turned crimson as Marines dug for whatever cover they could find among the scattered rocks and debris. Private Rodriguez felt the air split above his head as a Japanese sniper's bullet missed him by inches. Around him, the carefully planned assault was dissolving into chaos as hidden machine gun nests opened fire from positions that should have been obliterated by the 72-day bombardment. "Get off the beach, move inland." Sergeant Patterson's voice carried over the din of battle, but moving anywhere on Iwo Jima proved nearly impossible. The fine volcanic sand shifted under every step, making it feel like running through quicksand while carrying 60 pounds of equipment. Marines who tried to dig foxholes found that the loose sand simply flowed back into any hole they created, leaving them exposed to the withering crossfire. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison watched in growing horror from his command post as his carefully orchestrated battle plan crumbled within the first hour. Radio reports crackled with desperate calls for medical corpsmen and ammunition resupply. "Sir, we're taking heavy casualties on Red Beach," reported Captain Thomas Anderson, his voice tight with stress. The enemy positions weren't touched by the bombardment. They're dug in deeper than we thought possible. The Japanese defenders, following General Kuribayashi's meticulous defensive plan, had indeed survived the massive pre-invasion bombardment by constructing their positions deep underground. Unlike previous Pacific battles where Japanese forces had charged into American machine gun fire, Kuribayashi's troops remained hidden in their concrete bunkers and interconnected tunnel systems. Each position had been carefully surveyed and registered for interlocking fields of fire, turning the invasion beaches into a killing ground. First Lieutenant Robert Hayes led his platoon from the 7th Marines in a desperate attempt to silence a machine gun nest that was decimating the troops on Yellow Beach. "Follow me," he shouted, rising from behind a pile of volcanic rock and charging toward the hidden position. His Marines followed, their battle cry lost in the roar of enemy fire. Hayes made it 20 yards before a burst from a Nambu machine gun cut him down. His platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant David Williams, immediately took command and continued the assault. The peculiar nature of Iwo Jima's terrain added another layer of difficulty to the already hellish battle. The island's volcanic composition meant that traditional weapons had unexpected effects. Grenades often failed to fragment properly in the soft sand, while the sulfurous atmosphere corroded metal equipment at an alarming rate. Marines found their rifle actions jamming from the fine volcanic dust that infiltrated every mechanism. Medical Corpsman 3rd Class Anthony Martinez crawled through the volcanic sand toward a wounded Marine, ignoring the bullets that kicked up geysers of blackbeard around him. The Japanese had specifically targeted medical personnel, understanding that each fallen corpsman would demoralize the Marines and leave wounded men to die. Martinez reached Private Bobby Thompson, who had taken shrapnel in his legs from a mortar burst. "Corpsman's here, Marine," Martinez whispered, beginning to apply pressure bandages while Thompson gritted his teeth against the pain. As the first day wore on, it became clear that Iwo Jima would be unlike any previous Pacific battle. By nightfall on February 19th, the Marines had secured only a narrow beachhead, far short of their planned objectives. The cost had been staggering, over 1,000 casualties in a single day, with many more to come. General Schmidt, reviewing the casualty reports aboard his command ship, began to understand the magnitude of the task ahead. The Japanese defensive strategy was proving devastatingly effective. Rather than wasting lives in banzai charges, Kuribayashi's forces remained hidden in their fortified positions, emerging only to deliver precise, deadly fire before disappearing back into their underground network. American flamethrowers and satchel charges could destroy individual positions, but the tunnel system allowed defenders to simply retreat to alternate firing positions and continue the fight. Colonel Morrison gathered his surviving company commanders as darkness fell over the island. The sulfurous smoke from various vents mixed with the acrid smell of curdite and the metallic scent of blood. "Gentlemen, we're in for a long fight," he told them grimly. "The enemy has turned this entire island into a fortress. Every cave, every tunnel, every piece of high ground is fortified and defended. We're going to have to take it yard by yard." Dawn on February 20th brought no relief to the Marines clinging to their precarious foothold. On Iwo Jima, Mount Suribachi dominated the southern end of the island like a malevolent sentinel, its slopes honeycombed with gun positions that could rake the invasion beaches with devastating fire. Colonel Morrison knew that his 28th Marines would have to take the mountain before the rest of the island could be secured. "We're going to assault Suribachi," Morrison announced to his battalion commanders during the pre-dawn briefing. "Intelligence estimates there are over 1,000 Japanese defenders in that mountain, dug into positions we can barely imagine. Every cave entrance, every tunnel mouth, every crevice has been turned into a firing point." Major Charles Shepard, commanding the 3rd Battalion, studied the volcanic peak through his field glasses and shook his head grimly. Sergeant Patterson led his squad. In the initial advance toward Suribachi's base, moving through terrain that seemed designed by nature to favor the defenders. The approach to the mountain led through broken ground littered with volcanic rocks, sulfur vents that released choking gases, and the twisted wreckage of Japanese equipment destroyed in the preliminary bombardment. Every step forward was contested by hidden snipers and machine gunners who seemed to vanish into the mountain itself after firing. Private Rodriguez found himself pinned down behind a chunk of volcanic rock, unable to move as Japanese bullets chipped away at his meager cover. To his left, Corporal O'Brien was trying to spot the muzzle flash of a sniper who had already wounded two Marines in their squad. There, O'Brien pointed toward a seemingly innocent crack in the mountain's lower slope. He's firing from inside that crevice. The realization that the Japanese could fire from positions completely invisible to the attackers was both frustrating and terrifying. The Marines advanced toward Suribachi quickly became a bloody stalemate. Japanese defensive positions had been carved directly into the volcanic rock, connected by tunnels that allowed defenders to appear and disappear like ghosts. Flamethrowers proved partially effective, but the mountain's natural caves and artificial tunnels seemed to extend indefinitely into its depths. For every position cleared, Tamor would open fire from unexpected angles. Lieutenant Hayes' replacement, Second Lieutenant Gary Coleman, led an assault team equipped with satchel charges toward what appeared to be a major cave entrance on Suribachi's eastern slope. "We're going to blow that position and work our way up," he told his men. The approach required crossing 50 yards of open ground under direct observation from multiple firing points. Coleman made the decision that countless Marine officers would make during the battle. He would lead from the front, regardless of the personal cost. Military records from the National Archives, as documented in Iwo Jima, Legacy of Valor by Bill D. Ross, provide detailed accounts of the specific tactical challenges faced during the assault on Mount Suribachi. The assault team moved forward in short rushes, using whatever cover the broken terrain provided. Coleman reached the cave entrance first, pulling the pin on his satchel charge and hurling it into the darkness beyond. The explosion sent a shower of volcanic rock cascading down the mountainside, but within minutes, rifle fire began emanating from the same position. The Japanese had simply retreated deeper into their tunnel system and returned. When the immediate danger passed, Staff Sergeant Williams, now commanding Hayes' former platoon, realized that traditional assault tactics were inadequate for Suribachi's unique defensive network. "We need to think like miners, not Marines," he told his men during a brief respite. "These positions are connected underground. We take one, they pop up in another. We've got to find a way to seal them permanently." His observation would prove prophetic as the Marines gradually developed new tactics specifically for fighting in the volcanic fortress. The Japanese defenders, many of them veterans of previous Pacific battles, had learned harsh lessons about American firepower and tactics. Rather than dying gloriously in futile banzai charges, they had committed themselves to a defense that would exact the maximum possible cost for every yard of advance. General Kuribayashi's orders were explicit: make the Americans pay so dearly that they would reconsider their planned invasion of Japan itself. As the second day of battle ended, Mount Suribachi remained firmly in Japanese hands despite continuous assaults by the 28th Marines. The volcanic peak continued to dominate the battlefield, its hidden guns making movement across the invasion beaches hazardous and supply operations nearly impossible. Colonel Morrison, studying casualty reports by the light of a guttering candle in his command post, began to understand that Iwo Jima would test the Marine Corps as it had never been tested before. Corpsman Martinez worked through the night, moving between wounded Marines scattered across the volcanic sand. The island's unique terrain made evacuation extremely difficult. Stretcher bearers struggled through the loose sand, while remaining exposed to sniper fire from Suribachi's heights. "How many more days of this?" whispered Private Thompson, his legs now properly splinted, but his spirit shaken by the intensity of the fighting. Martinez had no answer, but he suspected they were all thinking the same thing. They were trapped on an island that seemed determined to consume them all. By February 22nd, the Marines had learned that progress on Iwo Jima would be measured not in miles or even hundreds of yards, but in individual yards purchased with blood and determination. Every cave entrance, every fortified position, every pile of volcanic rock potentially concealed Japanese defenders, who had spent months preparing their deadly reception for the American invaders. Sergeant Patterson's squad had spent 2 days fighting for control of a single ridge line. That offered a marginally better approach to Mount Suribachi's base. The position changed hands 3 times before the Marines finally managed to hold it. At a cost of 6 wounded and 2 dead from his original 12-man squad, "We're bleeding out," Patterson confided to Corporal O'Brien during a brief lull in the fighting. "At this rate, there won't be enough of us left to take the mountain." Lieutenant Colonel Morrison faced the same grim mathematics as he reviewed his battalion's status. The 28th Marines had suffered over 40% casualties in just 3 days of fighting, with Mount Suribachi still firmly in enemy hands. Replacement troops were arriving from the transport ships offshore, but many were rear-echelon personnel with minimal combat training, pressed into service as riflemen out of desperate necessity. The Japanese defensive system was revealing its true sophistication as the battle progressed. Major Shepard's 3rd Battalion discovered that seemingly isolated bunkers were actually connected by elaborate tunnel networks that allowed defenders to reinforce threatened positions or escape when their primary positions became untenable. "It's like fighting ghosts," reported Captain Anderson after his company spent an entire day clearing positions that were reoccupied during the night. Private Rodriguez had developed a 1,000-yard stare that was becoming common among the Marines. Still capable of fighting, the constant stress of never knowing where the next shot would come from, combined with the sulfurous atmosphere and volcanic grit that infiltrated every meal and piece of equipment, was wearing down even the most hardened veterans. Sleep came in brief, fitful intervals interrupted by the sound of infiltrators moving through the tunnel systems. Beneath their positions, the Marines gradually developed new tactics specific to Iwo Jima's unique challenges. Flamethrower teams became crucial for clearing the interconnected cave systems, but the volcanic rock often channeled the flames in unexpected directions, sometimes endangering the Marines operating the weapons. Demolition teams learned to use multiple charges to collapse tunnel entrances permanently. Though the Japanese often had alternate routes prepared in advance, 2nd Lieutenant Coleman, leading what remained of his assault team, made a crucial discovery during an attack on Suribachi's northern slope. "These tunnels aren't just defensive positions," he reported to Morrison via radio. "They're supply routes, communication lines, and living quarters all rolled into one. The Japanese can move their entire garrison around inside the mountain without ever exposing themselves to our fire." This intelligence would prove vital to understanding why conventional bombardment had been so ineffective. Corpsman Martinez had become a legend among the Marines for his willingness to venture into the most dangerous areas to retrieve wounded men. His medical supplies were running critically low, and the volcanic environment was causing infections at an alarming rate. Wounds that should have healed cleanly became septic within hours, due to the contaminated volcanic dust that seemed to coat everything on the island. "We need to get these men off the island," he reported to the battalion surgeon. But evacuation remained limited due to the ongoing battle for control of the beaches. The psychological toll of the fighting was becoming as significant as the physical. Casualties, Marines who had survived previous Pacific battles found Iwo Jima uniquely challenging because of the enemy's invisible nature, at least on Saipan and Guadalcanal. "You could see the bastards coming," muttered Staff Sergeant Williams. "Here, they're like termites in the walls. You never know where they'll pop up next." General Kuribayashi, observing the battle's progress from his deep command bunker, was satisfied with his defensive strategy's effectiveness. American casualties were mounting at a rate that exceeded even his optimistic projections, while his own losses remained relatively light due to the protection afforded by his underground fortress system. He had transformed Iwo Jima into exactly what he had promised his superiors, a killing ground that would make the Americans reconsider their invasion of Japan. As the 4th day of battle dawned, Mount Suribachi continued to loom over the battlefield like a monument to Japanese resistance. However, the Marines were beginning to adapt to their unique challenges, developing new tactics and displaying the stubborn determination that had carried them across the Pacific. The mountain would fall, but the cost would be higher than anyone had imagined when the first landing craft had approached those black volcanic beaches. February 23rd marked the beginning of the most concentrated assault yet mounted against Mount Suribachi. Colonel Morrison had consolidated his remaining effective strength into 3 composite companies, each tasked with attacking the mountain from a different approach. The plan was simple in concept, but nightmarish in execution. Simultaneously assault multiple cave systems to prevent the Japanese from shifting defenders through their tunnel network. Sergeant Patterson, now commanding what had once been a full platoon, but was reduced to 16 Marines, led the attack on Suribachi's western slope. His men moved forward in the pre-dawn darkness, using the cover of shadows cast by the mountain itself to approach their objectives. "Remember," he whispered to his Marines, "once we start, there's no stopping. We go up that mountain, or we don't come back down." The attack commenced at 0600 hours with a coordinated barrage from destroyers offshore, followed immediately by close support aircraft striking the mountain's upper reaches. As the last bombs exploded, Patterson's team rushed forward, reaching the first tier of cave entrances before the Japanese defenders could fully react. Private Rodriguez, carrying a flamethrower for the first time, felt the weapon's weight as he approached a cave mouth that exhaled sulfurous gases. Like the breath of some underground demon, Lieutenant Coleman's assault team attacked from the eastern approach, using scaling equipment borrowed from the Navy to ascend the steeper volcanic cliffs that the Japanese had assumed were unclimbable. The gamble paid off initially, as Coleman's Marines reached positions above several key defensive points before being detected. "We've got them from above," Coleman radioed to Morrison, beginning vertical assault on cave systems. The fighting that followed was unlike anything in previous Pacific campaigns. Marines found themselves engaged in three-dimensional combat, fighting simultaneously on the mountain's surface and cave entrances, and through vertical shafts that connected different levels of the defensive network. Corporal O'Brien discovered that grenades dropped down ventilation shafts could clear positions that were otherwise inaccessible, while Japanese defenders responded by sealing some passages and booby-trapping others. Combat footage and first-hand accounts, as preserved in the Marine Corps' historical archives and referenced in With the Old Breed by Eugene Sledge, document the unique nature of the cave fighting tactics developed during the Iwo Jima campaign. Major Shepard's 3rd Battalion made the crucial breakthrough when Staff Sergeant Williams discovered a major tunnel entrance that had been camouflaged so effectively it had survived 3 days of intense fighting. "This isn't just another firing position," Williams reported after a preliminary reconnaissance. "This leads to the main tunnel system. If we can get inside and work our way up, we can attack their positions from behind." The assault into Suribachi's interior required a special kind of courage. Marines had to advance through narrow, sulfur-filled tunnels where the volcanic gases made breathing difficult, and visibility was limited to a few yards. Private Rodriguez found himself crawling through passages barely wide enough for his shoulders, his flamethrower tank scraping against volcanic rock. As he moved toward distant sounds of Japanese voices, the Japanese defenders, realizing that their tunnel system had been penetrated, began a series of desperate counterattacks designed to seal the Americans inside the mountain. Hand-to-hand combat in the narrow passages was particularly brutal, with neither side able to use their primary weapons effectively. Marines fought with pistols, knives, and entrenching tools in darkness broken only by muzzle flashes and the eerie glow of sulfur vents. Corpsman Martinez followed the assault teams into the tunnels, knowing that wounded Marines in the underground passages would die without immediate medical attention. The volcanic environment made his job even more challenging. The sulfurous atmosphere contaminated wounds instantly, while the narrow passages made it nearly impossible to properly treat serious injuries. "We've got to get them out of here," he radioed to the surface medical teams. But evacuation from the tunnel system required fighting for every yard of withdrawal. As February 23rd progressed, the Marines gradually gained control of Suribachi's lower levels, but each victory revealed new defensive positions higher up the mountain. The Japanese had constructed their fortress in layers, with multiple fallback positions prepared in advance. General Kuribayashi's defensive plan was working exactly as designed, even when positions were overrun. The attackers paid such a heavy price that their overall strength was steadily degraded. By late afternoon, Colonel Morrison realized that his 28th Marines were approaching their breaking point. Casualties had reduced some companies to squad strength, while ammunition and medical supplies were running critically low. However, reports from the assault teams indicated that Japanese resistance was also beginning to weaken, as their ammunition ran low and their tunnel system became increasingly compromised. The stage was set for the final assault on Mount Suribachi's summit, but the Marines who would make that assault were exhausted, bloodied, and far fewer in number than anyone had anticipated when the battle began. The mountain had extracted a terrible price, but Marine determination and adaptability were finally beginning to overcome even the most sophisticated defensive positions. the Japanese had ever constructed. February 24th dawned gray and sulphurous as the surviving Marines of the 28th Regiment prepared for what they hoped would be the final assault on Mount Suribachi summit. Colonel Morrison had fewer than 400 effective Marines remaining from his original 3,000-man regiment, but intelligence reports suggested the Japanese resistance was finally beginning to crack under the relentless pressure. Sergeant Patterson, now effectively commanding a company despite his enlisted rank, gathered his remaining Marines around a crude map sketched in the volcanic sand. Intelligence thinks there are maybe 50 Japs left on the summit, he told them. But we know how reliable intelligence has been so far. His men managed exhausted grins at the bitter joke. Every estimate of enemy strength had proven woefully inadequate throughout the battle. Lieutenant Coleman had survived for days of fighting that had claimed most of his fellow officers, and he now found himself one of the senior leaders despite his relatively junior rank. His assault team had been reinforced with Marines from other decimated units, creating an ad hoc force that reflected the desperate nature of their situation. "We go up together, we come down together," he told his mixed group of veterans and replacements. The final assault began with the most intensive bombardment yet directed at Suribachi's peak. Naval gunfire from offshore destroyers walked shells up the mountain slopes, while Marine artillery units fired over open sights at visible cave entrances. The bombardment lasted 30 minutes, turning the mountain's upper reaches into an inferno of exploding ordnance and cascading volcanic rock. Private Rodriguez, now carrying his third flamethrower after the previous two had been destroyed by enemy fire, followed Patterson's squad up the mountain's northern slope. The approach required climbing over the bodies of Japanese defenders who had died in their positions, rather than surrender, a grim testament to the fanatical nature of their resistance. Each cave entrance had to be individually cleared, a process that consumed precious time and ammunition. The Marines' advance up Suribachi revealed the true extent of the Japanese defensive preparation. Every natural cave had been improved and connected to artificial tunnels, creating a network that extended throughout the mountain's interior. Many positions contained supplies for weeks of continued resistance, indicating that the Japanese had expected the battle to last much longer than it ultimately did. Corporal O'Brien made a discovery that would prove crucial to the final assault: a major tunnel entrance near the summit that appeared to lead directly to the mountain's main command post. "This is it," he radioed to Coleman. "If we can get inside and work our way to their command center, we might be able to end this thing." The entrance was heavily defended, but it represented the best chance to break the deadlock. The assault on the command tunnel required every remaining flamethrower and demolition charge the Marines possessed. Private Rodriguez led the initial attack, his flamethrower creating a path through the defensive positions, while demolition teams followed with satchel charges to seal side passages. The fighting was intense but brief. Many Japanese defenders had expended their ammunition and were reduced to fighting with swords and improvised weapons. As the Marines fought their way through Suribachi's upper tunnels, they began encountering Japanese soldiers who were clearly suffering from the effects of prolonged underground combat. The sulphurous atmosphere, limited food and water, and constant stress had taken their toll on the defenders. Many surrendered rather than continue fighting, an unprecedented development in the Pacific War, where Japanese troops typically fought to the death. Staff Sergeant Williams, leading the composite squad of Marines from 3 different units, emerged from a tunnel entrance just below Suribachi's actual summit to find the mountain's peak seemingly undefended. "This is too easy," he muttered, remembering similar situations that had turned into deadly traps. However, a careful reconnaissance revealed that the Japanese had finally exhausted their ability to defend every position. The famous flag-raising photograph taken by Joe Rosenthal, as documented in numerous historical accounts including Flags of Our Fathers, would soon capture one of the most iconic moments in American military history. At 10:20 a.m. on February 23rd, a patrol led by First Lieutenant Harold Schreier reached Mount Suribachi summit carrying a small American flag. The sight of the stars and stripes flying over the mountain sent a wave of jubilation through the Marines still fighting on the beaches below, but the celebration was premature. Suribachi had fallen, but the rest of Iwo Jima remained firmly in Japanese hands, and the costliest fighting still lay ahead. Colonel Morrison, observing the flag raising from his command post, felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Mount Suribachi had been neutralized as a threat to the invasion beaches, but intelligence reports indicated that the main Japanese defensive positions were located in the island's northern section, where the terrain was even more favorable to the defenders. The Marines had won their first major victory on Iwo Jima, but at a cost that foreshadowed the price they would pay for the rest of the island. The fall of Mount Suribachi marked the end of the battle's first phase, but as the Marines would soon discover, General Kobayashi had always intended Suribachi to be a preliminary defense. His main defensive positions, constructed in the rocky terrain of northern Iwo Jima, would prove even more formidable than the volcanic mountain that had already claimed so many American lives. The raising of the American flag over Mount Suribachi on February 23rd became an iconic symbol of American determination. But for the Marines still fighting on Iwo Jima, it marked only the beginning of their deadliest trials. General Kobayashi had always intended to make his primary stand in the island's northern section, where the terrain was more favorable to defense, and his most experienced troops waited in positions that made Suribachi's defenses seem simple by comparison. Colonel Morrison, promoted to regimental commander after his superior became a casualty, surveyed the northern approaches with growing apprehension. The ground ahead consisted of rocky ridges, deep ravines, and broken terrain that channeled any advance into predetermined killing zones. Intelligence estimates suggested that over 15,000 Japanese defenders remained in positions that had been under construction for 8 months. Sergeant Patterson, now wearing lieutenant's bars earned through battlefield promotion, led his rebuilt company toward the first major defensive line in northern Iwo Jima. His original squad had been virtually wiped out during the Suribachi fighting, and his current command consisted largely of replacements who had never experienced combat before arriving on the Sulphur Island. "Stay close, keep your heads down, and remember what we learned on the mountain," he told them. "These bastards are dug in deep." The attack on the main Japanese defensive line began on February 26th with the largest artillery barrage yet fired in the Pacific Theater. Every available gun, from battleship cannons to Marine Corps howitzers, concentrated their fire on the suspected enemy positions. The bombardment lasted hours and expended more ammunition than some entire previous campaigns. Yet when the Marines advanced, they found the Japanese positions largely intact. Lieutenant Coleman, commanding a battalion after successive casualties among senior officers, quickly realized that the northern defenses were fundamentally different from Suribachi's cave systems. "They're not just hiding in caves anymore," he radioed to Morrison. "They've created interlocking fields of fire that cover every possible approach. We can't get close enough to use flamethrowers or demolitions effectively." The Japanese had learned from their experience defending Suribachi and had constructed their northern positions to neutralize the tactics the Marines had developed. Underground positions were deeper and better ventilated. Tunnel systems were more complex and harder to penetrate, and defensive positions were sited to provide mutual support against flamethrower attacks. Private Rodriguez, now a seasoned veteran, despite having been in combat for only 2 weeks, found himself part of an assault team tasked with clearing a complex of bunkers that controlled a crucial ridgeline. The position had withstood 3 previous attacks, and the approaches were littered with the bodies of Marines who had fallen trying to reach the objective. "How many more of us are they going to feed into this meat grinder?" he wondered aloud. Historical records from the Department of Defense, as compiled in Iwo Jima, Amphibious Epic by Jeter A. Isley and Philip A. Crowell, document the escalating casualty rates as the battle progressed into its final phases. Corpsman Martinez had witnessed horrors that would haunt him for the rest of his life, but he continued to venture into the killing zones to retrieve wounded Marines. The northern fighting was producing casualties at a rate that overwhelmed the medical system, and many wounded men were dying simply because there were not enough corpsmen to reach them in time. "We're losing them faster than we can save them," he reported to the chief medical officer. But the attacks continued because the island had to be taken. The Marines gradually developed new tactics for the northern defenses, but each adaptation came at a tremendous cost in lives. Tank infantry teams proved effective against some positions, but the Japanese had prepared anti-tank defenses that claimed many of the armored vehicles. Artillery support was crucial, but the complex terrain made it difficult to direct fire accurately without endangering friendly troops. Staff Sergeant Williams, leading the company after his captain became a casualty, made the breakthrough that would eventually crack the Japanese defense. During a night reconnaissance, He discovered that many of the defensive positions were connected by communication trenches that could be infiltrated by small teams of Marines. If we can get inside their defensive network, he reported, we can attack their positions from behind while the main force keeps them occupied from the front. The final phase of the Battle of Iwo Jima became a grinding war of attrition that tested American resolve as never before. Every yard of advance required multiple assaults, massive artillery support, and casualties that shocked even veteran commanders. Japanese resistance remained fanatical to the end, with many positions fighting until every defender was dead rather than surrendering. By March 26th, organized Japanese resistance on Iwo Jima had finally ended, though individual holdouts would continue fighting for days afterward. The costs had been staggering, over 25,000 American casualties, including nearly 7,000 dead, to secure an island 8 square miles in area. Of the 22,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 200 survived to be taken prisoner. Colonel Morrison, standing among the volcanic rocks where so many of his Marines had died, tried to comprehend the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Iwo Jima would provide the airbase needed for the final assault on Japan, potentially saving thousands of American lives in future operations. But the immediate cost had been almost beyond comprehension, and the survivors would carry the scars of the Sulphur Island for the rest of their lives. The Battle of Iwo Jima became a symbol of American determination and sacrifice, proving that even the most sophisticated defenses could not withstand the courage and adaptability of the United States Marine Corps. However, it also demonstrated the terrible price of victory against a determined enemy fighting for their homeland, foreshadowing the costs that would have been incurred in an invasion of Japan itself. The Sulphur Island had been conquered, but at a price that changed forever how America viewed the cost of war.